Hello, Iowa Realtors. We're back for another legal breakdown as part of our series, Disclosure, Duties, and Dilemmas. George, we've got a topic that we want to talk about today, protective clauses.
Gabe, I get a lot of phone calls from agents concerning protective clauses.
Yes.
Something we need to talk about, something agents, brokers, you need to be made aware of.
Absolutely. So, George, just kind of at the most basic level, tell the viewers a little bit about when we say protective clauses. What are we talking about?
Well, I'm going to go to Iowa Administrative Code 193E. I'm just going to go from there, Gabe, and I think this says it all.
Yeah.
Enforcing protective clause. To enforce a protective clause beyond the expiration of an exclusive listing contract, there must be a provision for the protective clause in the listing contract, which establishes a definite protection period in writing, and prior to the expiration of the listing, the broker must furnish to the listing party the names and available contact information of persons to whom the property was presented during the active term of listing for whom protection is sought. Now, protective clause, Gabe, I think to answer your question is, let's say that I'm a broker and I have 3 or 4 people that I've seen the property to,
Yep.
and my listing expires,
Yep.
okay, and I feel I've worked to earn compensation for the work I did showing the property
Yes.
To those 3 or 4 people. So I notify the seller that if you sell to these people, I'm enforcing a protective clause that you
Yes.
agreed to, so I can receive compensation.
And George, to make sure we're clear here, so you just said in that situation, you're the listing broker,
Correct.
okay? So what the rule is saying is if you show the property to those 3 people,
Correct.
you have to provide prior to that listing expiring, right? You have to provide a list in writing to your seller client saying, these are the 3 people I showed the property to. If you try to sell it to them after this expires in the next 180 days, I'm entitled to a commission.
Exactly right, Gabe. And it's more than just in writing. The statute further goes to say the delivery of that notice, of that protective clause, shall be by personal service with written acknowledgement of receipt or by both regular mail and certified mail return receipt requested.
And that's very important, right?
Proof. That shows proof that you enacted that protective clause.
Because if there's ever an issue and somebody says, you didn't protect the parties correctly, you better believe if someone's going to fight this, they're going to go right to that commission rule and say, you didn't comply with the commission's requirements, I'm not bound to this protective clause, you didn't certify this, you didn't provide return receipt requested. You can see all those defenses that would be raised.
You can't rely on the text here, Gabe.
Yeah. So, and I think it's, we just talked about protective clauses at a very basic level, but here's another question I get from time to time, okay?
Sure.
Same example that we used, right? You're the listing agent, there's 3 people you showed the property to. Let's say that you actually did everything perfectly right, George, as you always would. You put the 3 names in writing, you gave them to the seller 2 days before your expiration of your listing agreement. You complied with all the notice requirements, exactly how we just read. But let's say that right after your listing expires, your seller goes and they hire a new listing firm and they enter into a new listing agreement. And let's say that new listing firm ends up selling the property to one of those people that you showed it to.
Great question, Gabe. And for that, I think you have to look at the language that's in your listing agreement.
Correct.
That addresses the protective clause.
Correct.
Okay. Because there are some listing agreements, when they address that may say that protective clause terminates once a new listing is entered into with a new broker.
And if you look at the IAR exclusive listing agreement, again, not all of our members have to use that. Many do, many don't. But if you're using the IAR listing agreement, it's very clear that even if you have a protective clause, a new valid listing agreement sort of voids the protective clause. The only exception would be is if the seller, not you, the previous listing agent, but if the seller reserves a party, that would be the one exception where that new broker wouldn't be entitled to a commission, okay?
Yep. And I have a question, kind of follow up on that. Can you think of any scenarios in which a seller may be obligated to pay 2 real estate commissions? 2 different brokers.
I think a seller needs to very much understand the full terms of their previous listing agreement, because there are listing agreements that aren't like IARs that do not say that a new listing agreement terminates the protective clause. In that situation, there might be some concern that they have obligated themselves under payment terms under 2 listing agreements, and that's a scary thing. So make sure that you're aware of what's in your listing agreement.
Brokers, review those listing agreements with your sellers. New listing broker, make sure you review that with your seller. There may be an occasion where they pay 2 commissions.
But to me, the language of the IAR listing agreement makes sense, though, because at least in my opinion, George, the whole purpose of a protection clause is so in the situation where you're listing broker and you've got 3 people, the whole purpose, in my opinion, is that so one of those clients can't just, start Facebook messaging a buyer and say, hey, my listing agreement expires in 3 days. Let's wait for this thing to expire and let's just cut the listing agent right out of the deal.
Absolutely. I think that's what it's targeted. I've had that phone call. Perhaps you have too.
Yes.
People try to do deals on their own to cut out that realtor, right?
Yes.
Not a good idea, but people try to do that.
But again, the reason I think IAR that we have in our form, and it makes sense to me, is to say, well, if a new listing agent has come in with a new listing agreement, that sort of voids the protection clause. And I think the purpose of that is that somebody should have the freedom. If they're not happy with the services they were provided under the previous listing agreement, they should be able to have the freedom once that expires to hire a new listing agent.
Oh, I would agree. It's the consumer call.
But again, I think the takeaway is make the disclosures properly, and at the end of the day, make sure you know what's in that listing agreement because protection clauses can differ.
Exactly.
All right, see you next time.